Free Weight and Machine Exercise Techniques by Steve Bliss, MS and CSCS with distinction.
This presentation is entitled Free Weight and Machine Exercise Techniques. We will start by addressing the issue of mechanical specificity. The reason we've selected many of the exercises discussed in this presentation is because they have a high degree of mechanical specificity to athletic activities as well as activities of daily living. If you're familiar with the writings of Yuri Vershansky, he refers to this as dynamic correspondence. Basically what this means is that the basic mechanics of a movement rather than its outward appearance should be specific to the activity in question. There are 5 criterion for determining how well an activity corresponds to an athletic activity or an activity of daily living. The first of these is power, also referred to as dynamics of effort. The second is impulse. The third is movement amplitude and direction. Fourth is accentuated region of force application. And the fifth and final one is muscular work regime, which refers to concentric, eccentric, or possibly stretch shortening cycle or plyometric. Collectively, these 5 criterion are very important for selecting and prioritizing training tasks. And it's very important to understand that this is done on the basis of transfer of both learning and training effects as opposed to skill simulation. One of the classic mistakes made in practice is to try to simulate the outward appearance of a movement as opposed to trying to simulate or duplicate the mechanics of a movement. Now, one of the most useful criterion visually for determining the dynamic correspondence of a training movement is called the universal athletic position. And if you look at these 2 athletes, you can immediately see the similarities in the position here. Now again, we don't want to be deceived by the outward appearance. What's really important here are a couple of basic things. First of all, in neither case is guided resistance involved. And what that means is that both of these athletes have to control and stabilize and direct the resistance that they're moving, whether it involves a barbell or whether it's simply the athlete's body mass. A few other basic points here. Both athletes are balanced on a full foot. Now the weight is distributed differently between the heel and the toes depending on whether the athlete is prepared to move or not. But the point is that the weight is distributed on a full foot with both the heel and the forefoot in contact with the ground. The second thing that's very obvious here is both athletes have a flat posture. Torso is frequently referred to as double arched. What this means is that the hips are out behind the center of gravity. The shoulders are above the hips but are in front of the center of gravity. And basically the athlete is balanced over his or her feet. The third thing that's common to this position is that you'll find athletes in this position virtually any time that they're on 2 feet and they have to get leverage or generate power. And this is not limited to situations where they run and jump either. Here's an example of an athlete who's on a pair of skates in a goalie's ready position in the sport of ice hockey. And frankly, there isn't enough time to go through the number of examples of this that you see in sport. This is common to a golfer in full windup. Baseball infielder getting ready to field a ball that's been hit at them, a batter getting ready to swing at a ball that's being thrown, and so on. There are many, many examples of this in sport, and this is a very, very useful visual criterion for determining the role that a movement might play in your training programs. Okay, the practitioner's #1 responsibility is safety, and there are several safety criteria we need to address before we get to the actual techniques. First of these is spotting. There are several situations during which the practitioner should spot his or her athlete or client, and there are certain situations when the practitioner should not. The first situation when it's appropriate to spot is when a bar or a dumbbell is moving over the athlete's or the client's head or face. This can occur in a sitting, a standing, or a supine position depending on the movement. Some examples of these include shoulder press, bench press, dumbbell chest fly, lying triceps extension, and so on. There are many other examples. When spotting barbell exercises, it's important for the spotter to hold the bar with an alternated hand grip, meaning one hand is pronated and the other is supinated, and to establish a solid base of support and flat back. Here's an example of spotter in proper liftoff position for an athlete or client performing the bench press. Here's an example of proper spotting technique for the shoulder press or the military press. During dumbbell exercises, It's important to spot as close to the dumbbells as possible, and generally what this means is that the spotter should have his or her hands at the athlete's wrists, not below the elbows, as has been commonly done in some settings. This is a much safer way to spot and prevents the problem of having the athlete's elbows collapse such that the weights can still drop out of control. Here's an example of proper spotting technique on a dumbbell incline press. If you notice, the spotter is prepared to hold on to the athlete's wrists to give assistance if necessary. Here's the same movement during the bottom position after the descent. Notice how the spotter once again has a slight grip at the athlete's wrists and is ready to assist from the bottom up if necessary. Another situation where spotting is appropriate is when the bar is placed on the athlete's back or racked across the anterior shoulders, as is the case in movements such as the back squat, the lunge, step up, and the front squat. Here's an example of two spotters working in tandem with an athlete performing a back squat. It's very important for all three people to communicate with one another to prevent a situation where the bar helicopters if one spotter lifts or supports the end of the bar while the other does not. So teamwork is extremely important here. Notice the importance also of proper safety equipment such as a power rack. Here's an example of two spotters working in tandem with an athlete performing the front squat. The same considerations apply here. Here's an example of a spotter in good position working with an athlete who's performing a lunge. Notice we have a single spotter in this situation as opposed to two spotters. Here's an example of a single spotter in proper position with an athlete performing a step up. Once again, communication is still very important here as the two people work together. As mentioned a moment ago, spotting does not replace proper safety equipment. Whenever possible, spotting should be performed inside a power rack or other safety apparatus where the crossbars are in place at an appropriate height. This means that the athlete should be able to set the bar down in the rack if he or she needs to and escape without injury or without being pinned under the bar. The spotter's role in situations like this may simply be to assist the athlete in racking the bar. Now, during power exercises, spotting is generally not recommended. Examples of these kinds of movements include the Olympic-style lifts and their variations, the power clean, for example, hang clean, push press, clean and jerk, and snatch are examples of movements where, generally speaking, spotting is not indicated. If you notice, these are all movements that are performed explosively, where the bar is launched ballistically in some fashion. This usually involves additional equipment considerations, such as a lifting platform. Rubberized bumper plates are also very commonly used in this situation. And what's important here is that the practitioner give the proper cues and guidelines for the athlete and teach the athlete or the client how to escape from under the bar without the need of spotting. Now, some examples of the kind of guidelines that are commonly given here. There are two very important ones. The first is that the athlete should keep his or her grip on the bar. For example, if the athlete is performing a power clean or a jerk where the bar is even traveling overhead, if the athlete cannot complete the repetition for any reason or simply loses control of the bar, the athlete should keep their grip on the bar and use the downward action of the barbell to push themselves out of harm's way, as opposed to letting go and trying to outrun the bar. A second guideline that's very useful is that the athlete should be instructed and should practice how to escape by staying between the plates. This does not mean that the athlete stays under the bar. What it means is that they should move forward or backward, depending on how the bar is falling, rather than side to side to escape the downward action of the bar. Okay, another important safety recommendation is wearing a weight belt. There are generally two conditions during which an athlete or a client is advised to wear a weight belt. And both of these conditions really ought to be in place in order for this to be appropriate. The first condition is that the athlete should be performing a ground-based structural exercise that loads his or her trunk and places stress on the back. Examples of these kind of movements include front squats and back squats, standing shoulder press, deadlift, as well as power exercises. The second condition that's important is that these movements should be performed using maximal or near maximal loads. It is generally not advisable for the athlete to wear a weight belt even during a ground-based structural exercise if he or she is using warm-up weight or doing what's called a lead-in set. Here's an example of an exercise where wearing a weight belt is generally contraindicated. This is not a structural weight-bearing movement, and even at high workloads, this generally does not place a lot of stress on the back in terms of compressive force and the need for support. Here are more examples of exercises where the weight belt is contraindicated. Again, there's not sufficient stress being placed on the torso, and the belt does not play a useful role. It's simply serving as a crutch in situations like this. The problems with getting dependent on the weight belt, there are really two of them. The first is that it may reduce the training effect on the spinal stabilizers and abdominal muscles, which play a very important role. Second is that it may become habitual during other non-indicated exercises, such as the ones just shown, the lat pull down, bench press, bicep curl, leg extension, leg curl, and so on. A third important safety consideration for the practitioner is breathing. Generally speaking, some guidelines can be offered to the athlete or the client. The first of these is, whenever possible, breathe normally during training. A general rule of thumb is to inhale during the less stressful portion of the repetition, which is usually the eccentric phase, and to exhale through the more stressful portion, or the sticking point, which is typically occurring soon after the transition from eccentric to concentric action. More advanced guidelines for athletes and clients who are resistance trained and have technique experience. One would be to inhale prior to beginning a repetition, breath hold until immediately after the sticking point of the concentric phase, and then exhale. A second option is to inhale during the eccentric phase until prior to beginning the concentric phase, breath hold until immediately after the sticking point, and then exhale. The key concept here is to understand the Valsalva maneuver, which can be defined as trying to exhale against a closed throat or a closed glottis. Valsalva maneuver is valuable because it can increase the support offered to the spine during a movement, can reduce the forces on the vertebral discs, and help establish a flat back posture that was discussed earlier. Here's an example of an athlete trying to exhale against a closed glottis during a movement. It's very important for this to be a transient maneuver. Generally speaking, Valsalva should be performed for no more than 1 or 2 seconds. It's very important for athletes not to try to exhale against the closed glottis for prolonged periods of time, for example, 5 seconds or more, where the bar or the weight is moving at near zero velocity. The reason this is a problem is because blood pressure can increase up to 3-fold over resting levels, with possible problems in terms of blackouts, fatigue, rupturing blood vessels, dizziness, and so on. Some guidelines for the practitioner regarding breathing considerations. First, teach proper exercise technique. Second, determine the athlete's or client's training status. Third, assess the type of exercise to be performed. And then offer breathing guidelines accordingly. Exercises can generally be categorized as either standing or supine. Supine exercise is one where the athlete or the client is laying on his or her back. During supine exercises, the athlete or the client should maintain a 5-point contact in terms of body position. The 5 points include the head, shoulders or upper back, buttocks, the right foot, and the left foot. Depending on the lifter's body composition, his or her low back may be in contact with the pad as well. What's important is that the shoulders and buttocks are the points of highest pressure. Here's an example of an athlete in bench press position. Notice that the shoulders, upper back, head, buttocks, and both feet are in contact, and the feet are in contact with the ground. During standing exercises, there are guidelines regarding feet position. 2 guidelines that are important. First is that the feet should be slightly wider than hip width, and the heels and balls of the feet should both be in contact with the floor, what's known as a full foot. Because of my background as a strength and conditioning coach, most of the models throughout this presentation are referred to as athletes. The term athlete and client are interchangeable. This presentation consists of certain exercises that have been captured from the full-length free weight and machine exercise techniques video and DVD that are available from the NSCA Certification Commission. These are some of the more complicated movements that practitioners typically involve in their programs. The bench press is a core multi-joint exercise. Prime movers are the shoulder transverse adductors, including pectoralis major and anterior deltoid, scapular abductors, including serratus anterior and pectoralis minor, and the elbow extensors, including triceps brachii. During the bench press, the spotter assists the athlete in lifting the bar from the rack using an alternating grip. The athlete maintains a 5-point support with the head, upper back, buttocks, and both feet in contact. The athlete's grip is medium width, slightly wider than shoulder width. The bar is lowered to the chest either in a vertical movement path or in a slight arc, where the bar touches the highest point on the torso, usually at nipple level, and then extends straight up over the shoulders. From this view, you can see the bar moving in a slight arc. At the beginning of the descent, the bar is directly above the shoulders. The athlete lowers the bar to the chest, during which time the bar travels a few inches toward the waist and then moves back directly above the shoulders in an upward and backward motion. The flat dumbbell fly is an assistant single joint exercise if one considers the shoulder complex as one joint. Prime movers include the shoulder transverse adductors, including pectoralis major and anterior deltoid, and shoulder girdle abductors, including serratus anterior and pectoralis minor. Starting position during the flat dumbbell fly, the athlete should be in a 5-point contact position. Elbows should be slightly flexed, and that position should be maintained throughout the entire movement. Hands and dumbbell handles are parallel. Elbows are pointed out, and the dumbbells begin over the chest. During the downward movement phase, the athlete lowers the dumbbells in a wide arc. Shoulder, elbow, hand, and dumbbells stay in one plane. At the lowest position, the athlete lowers the dumbbells to chest or shoulder level, with the elbows pointing down to the floor. During the upward movement phase, the athlete raises the dumbbells in a wide arc, as if hugging a tree trunk. The athlete should be instructed to go up and around without pressing the dumbbells up. The lying triceps extension is an assistant single joint exercise. The prime mover is the elbow extensors, including the triceps brachii. The starting position for the lying triceps extension, the athlete should be in a 5-point contact position, with the elbows pointing toward the legs, bar over the chest, not the face, and upper arms parallel to each other. During the downward movement phase, the upper arms and body remain stationary, and movement occurs only at the elbow. In the lowest position, the athlete lowers the bar to the forehead or the top of the head, but not over the head. This depends upon his or her arm length. In any case, the athlete should guard against striking the head or face with the bar. During the upward movement phase, the upper arms and body remain stationary, and movement occurs only at the elbow. The bent over row is an assistance multi-joint exercise. It's considered an assistance movement because it cannot be used to determine 1RMs. Prime movers are the scapular adductors, including middle trapezius and rhomboids, shoulder extensors, including latissimus dorsi, teres major, and posterior deltoid, and elbow flexors, including brachialis, biceps brachii, and brachioradialis. The starting position during the bent over row, the athlete should be in a squat-like stance with the feet shoulder width or slightly wider, feet pointing straight ahead or angled slightly out. Back is flat or double arched, with the shoulders above the hips and the head in a neutral position. The athlete has a medium width grip with the hands wider than shoulder width. Movement should occur only at the shoulders and elbows. There should be no movement in the hips or knees. Bar is raised to the athlete's torso. The bar is lowered back under control. Bar should not be raised until it's in contact with the abdomen or the upper chest. It should be raised to the sternum at approximately nipple level. During the descent, the bar should be lowered to full elbow extension with no movement at the hips or knees. Back should remain flat. Head should remain in a neutral position. Full foot contact with the floor. The lat pull down is an assistance multi-joint exercise. It's considered an assistance movement because it cannot be used to determine 1RMs. Prime movers are the shoulder adductors, including latissimus dorsi and teres major, scapular adductors, including middle trapezius and rhomboids, shoulder extensors, including latissimus dorsi, teres major, and posterior deltoid, and elbow flexors, including brachialis, biceps brachii, and brachioradialis. During the starting position for the lat pull down, the athlete's torso is leaning back slightly to make room for the bar to travel in front of the head. The hands have a wide grip with the thumbs closed around the bar. The athlete begins the movement by pulling the bar straight down to the clavicles or upper sternum with little or no movement in the legs, hips, or trunk. The bar is then raised back to arm's length overhead with the arms fully extended and no movement at the hip or trunk. The back squat is a core multi-joint exercise. The prime movers are the hip extensors, which consist of the hamstring group and gluteus maximus, and the knee extensors, which are primarily the quadriceps group. This is the high bar position in the back squat. Notice that the athlete has the bar racked across the mid and upper trapezius, has a medium width grip, with both hands wrapped around the bar with a closed grip. In the low bar position, notice that the bar is now down in the middle trapezius and deltoids. See also the wider grip. Once again, the hands are wrapped around the bar with a closed grip. Some basic pointers during the back squat. Notice that the athlete's head is in a neutral position, not overly extended or flexed, with the eyes generally pointing straight ahead. Back is flat or double arched. Feet are slightly wider than shoulder width grip, with the toes either pointing straight ahead or angled outward slightly. And a full foot remains in contact with the ground throughout the movement, with both the heel and the forefoot in contact. Notice that the first thing that happens during the athlete's descent is that the hips move backward as opposed to straight down. So in the bottom of the descent, the athlete is in the athletic position with the hips behind the center of gravity, the shoulders above or slightly in front of the center of gravity, and the athlete is in a balanced position. The athlete's depth during the squat should be limited by his or her ability to maintain a flat posture and keep a full foot in contact with the ground without the heels coming off the ground. During the low bar squat, the hips tend to be relatively further away from the center of gravity and the knees tend to stay closer. Once again, this distributes most of the torque to the hip joint with relatively less torque at the knee. Same general guidelines are applicable in terms of posture, head position, and foot contact. When the back squat is performed in the high bar position, the knees tend to travel further away from the center of gravity and the hips tend to stay closer to the center of gravity than they do during the low bar squat. This tends to send more of the torque to the knee and less torque to the hip in the process. Same basic criterion are applicable in terms of head in neutral position, posture, hips as far behind the center of gravity as is achievable with the bar in this position on the shoulders, full foot in contact with the ground throughout the movement. And once again, the athlete's depth is limited only by his or her ability to keep the back flat and the feet in contact with the ground. Another general guideline is that the feet and knees should stay in line with one another. This does not mean that the knees cannot travel past the toes in a front to back direction, but generally that the legs should stay in line with the feet. The front squat is a core multi-joint exercise. The prime movers are the hip extensors, including the hamstring group and gluteus maximus, and the knee extensors, including the quadriceps group. The athlete has two basic choices in terms of the starting position for the front squat. Again, the operative concept in either case is that the athlete raises the elbows up to shoulder levels such that the bar is supported across the shoulders and torso, not supported in the grip. The first is a parallel position, very similar to the finished position for a power clean or the starting position for a push press, where the elbows are rotated in front of the bar, hands are slightly wider than shoulder width, and grip is relaxed enough so that the elbows are raised up to shoulder height. The second option is a crossed grip, where the athlete has an open grip with the hands over the top of the bar. The athlete first supports the bar across the shoulders and chest, then places the hands over the top of the bar and lifts it out of a rack. As compared with a parallel grip, where the athlete first grips the bar, then places the elbow in proper position before lifting out of the rack. Many of the same guidelines presented for the back squat also apply for the front squat. The head is in a neutral position, back is flat or double arched, feet are placed slightly wider than shoulder width, toes are pointed straight ahead or angled slightly out, with the weight supported on a full foot, distributed between the heels and the forefoot. The same depth guidelines that apply to the back squat can also be applied to the front squat. The athlete should descend to the point, if possible, where the midline of the thigh is parallel to the floor. If the athlete can achieve a different depth than this while maintaining a flat back and without the heels coming off the floor, that's acceptable. In general, the front squat puts the athlete in more of a vertical torso position than the back squat does. The hips are relatively closer to the center of gravity and the knees are relatively further away. This means that more of the torque is directed toward the knee instead of the hip. The leg press or hip sled is a core multi-joint exercise. Prime movers are similar to the squat, but less supporting musculature is needed. Prime movers in this case are the hip extensors, consisting of the hamstring group and the gluteus maximus, and the knee extensors, including the quadriceps group. Here's an example of the hip sled where the athlete is using a squat-like foot position. Stance is slightly wider than the shoulders with the toes angled out. An alternative to this would be a closer parallel foot position where the feet are typically in the middle or lower part of the platform. This tends to create more torque at the knee and results in more stress on the quadriceps, as opposed to the squat-like stance where there tends to be more torque at the hip and it results in more stress on the hip extensors. When moving the platform into the starting position, the athlete should begin with the platform lower rather than higher to make it relatively easy to lift off and not have to reach to unlatch the catch bars. The downward movement phase is very similar to the squat. The lowest position is achieved when one or more of the following occur. Thighs are parallel to the platform, knees move in or out, heels lose contact with the platform, or the hips or buttocks move off the seat. The upward movement phase should be performed until the knees are fully extended but not forcefully locked. When racking the platform, the athlete should not remove his or her feet until the supports are in place. Once again, it's advisable to rack the platform at a lower height rather than a higher one so the athlete does not have to reach. The lunge is an assistance multi-joint exercise. It's considered an assistance movement because it cannot be used to determine 1RMs. Prime movers include the hip extensors, including the hamstring group and gluteus maximus, and knee extensors, including the quadriceps group. Starting position during the lunge. The athlete's stance should be similar to the squat in terms of feet being shoulder width or slightly wider, toes straight ahead or pointing slightly out, with the torso upright and the back flat. During the forward movement phase, the athlete executes a step and foot plant, where he or she takes an exaggerated step straight ahead so the feet are still at least hip wide or shoulder wide. It's not an inline step, and the knee should be above the ankle. One recommendation for this athlete would be to exaggerate the forward steps such that the toe is not directly under the knee. In the lunge position, the lead foot should be flat on the floor with both the heel and the forefoot in contact with the ground, and the athlete in a balanced position between the front and rear foot. In the lowest position, a slight toed-in position of the lead foot can aid in the athlete's balance. Trailing knee should be several inches off the floor and should not touch down. The athlete should maintain an erect torso, sitting back on the trailing leg. During the backward movement phase, the athlete should push the lead foot the full distance back to the trailing foot, initiating an upward scissors motion. The subsequent rep, the athlete should alternate legs, maintain an upright torso and neutral head position. The step up is an assistance multi-joint exercise. It's considered an assistance movement because it cannot be used to determine 1RMs. The prime movers are the hip extensors, including the hamstring group and gluteus maximus, and the knee extensors, including the quadriceps group. The starting position for the step up, the bar is racked across the shoulders in very much the same way that it is when the athlete performs a back squat. During the ascent, the lead leg should be placed on the box or on the platform such that the sole of the foot is in full contact with the surface. The athlete should not have partial foot contact on the platform. The athlete should have his or her head in a neutral position, back flat or double arched. The weight should be balanced over the lead leg such that the athlete does not have to push off with the trailing leg in order to raise up on the box. The trailing leg should be approximately as far behind the platform as the platform is high. In other words, if the athlete is stepping up on an 8-inch box, he or she should have his trailing leg 8 inches behind that box. Once on the box, the athlete should lower the body back to the starting position using the same lead leg. In other words, if the athlete steps up with the left leg, the athlete should also lower the body with the left leg. Once again, the lead leg should control the athlete's body weight during the full range of the ascent as well as the descent, so that the athlete does not fall back onto the trailing leg. The power clean is an explosive core multi-joint exercise. Prime movers are the hip extensors, including gluteus maximus and hamstrings, knee extensors, including quadriceps, ankle plantar flexors, including soleus and gastrocnemius, shoulder flexors and abductors, including deltoids, and shoulder girdle elevators, including upper trapezius. For the power clean, technique checklist will be given for the starting position, the first pull, the scoop, second pull, catch, and the downward phase. During the starting position for the power clean, the athlete's feet should be hip or shoulder width apart, with the toes pointing straight ahead or angled slightly out. Back should be flat or double arched. Head in a neutral position. Weight should be balanced on a full foot with the weight distributed between the heel and the forefoot. Generally, this puts the knees directly between the athlete's forearms or elbows, and the athlete has a pronated grip slightly wider than shoulder width with the thumbs closed around the bar. During the first pull, the athlete maintains a flat back and constant torso angle. The elbows remain straight and the head remains in a neutral position. The feet remain flat on the floor with the weight distributed between the heel and the forefoot. During this phase of the movement, the athlete is basically deadlifting the bar off the floor. At this point, the athlete is ready to perform the scoop or transition. During this phase of the movement, there is a balance shift between the heel and the forefoot as the hips are thrust forward and the athlete accelerates toward the second pull. The elbows remain straight, the back remains flat and double arched, and the head remains in a neutral position. During the second pull or power phase, the athlete performs an explosive triple extension where the hips, knees, and ankles extend rapidly and forcefully. The shoulders shrug the bar up and back, and the elbows begin to flex. During the catch or recovery, the bar continues its upward movement until it's racked across the front shoulders and upper chest. The elbows are quickly rotated under the bar such that they finish in front of the bar and are almost at shoulder level or as high as the shoulders if possible. The back remains flat and double arched when the bar is received across the torso. The knees flex slightly into about a quarter squat depth position. Feet remain flat on the floor, although they may have briefly left the floor during the explosive jumping portion of the movement. And the athlete stands the bar up to a fully upright position with the head neutral, elbows high, grip relaxed enough such that the bar is supported across the torso, not in the grip. Torso is upright, back is flat, and the athlete is basically in a standing position with the shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles in one vertical plane. During the downward phase, the athlete lowers the bar to thigh level first under control, and then lowers the bar back to the starting position on the floor. One recommendation for this athlete would be to maintain a flat back position while lowering the bar from his thighs to the floor. General breathing guidelines during the power clean. The athlete should inhale prior to performing the first pull, maintain the breath in the lungs until completing the scoop, the second pull, and the bar is caught on the shoulders, at which time it is safe to exhale. The push press is an explosive core multi-joint exercise. Prime movers are the hip extensors, including gluteus maximus and hamstrings, knee extensors, including quadriceps, ankle plantar flexors, including soleus and gastrocnemius, shoulder flexors and abductors, including deltoids, shoulder girdle elevators, including upper trapezius, and elbow extensors, including triceps brachii. For the push press, technique guidelines are given for the starting position, the dip and drive, catch, and the downward phase or recovery. During the starting position, the athlete has the bar racked across the anterior shoulders and upper chest in very much the same position that it would be in during a front squat or immediately after performing a power clean. Notice that the grip is relaxed enough so that the elbows are raised in front of the athlete's torso, as high as shoulder level, if possible. The head is in a neutral position. Back is flat or double arched. Torso is upright. Feet are flat on the ground with weight supported on a full foot and the weight distributed between the heel and the forefoot. And the athlete's shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles are very close to being in one vertical plane. The hands are slightly wider than shoulder width. Grip is relaxed. Weight is supported on the torso. The upward movement phase begins with an explosive dip and drive motion. During the dip, the hips and knees flex slightly into a quarter squat position. A rule of thumb here in terms of depth is that the athlete should descend approximately 10% of his or her body height, which usually results in a dip of approximately 6 to 8 inches or 15 to 20 centimeters. At the bottom of the dip, the athlete immediately reverses direction into an explosive upward drive. This also involves an explosive triple extension of the hips, knees, and ankles. Once the athlete has completed the explosive jumping portion of the movement, the shoulders are explosively shrugged upwards. The arms begin to extend because of the upward acceleration of the bar, but are not involved in a pressing motion. The feet lift off the platform briefly as the athlete completes the explosive jump, at which time he can explosively push himself under the bar to prepare for the catch and recovery. During the catch or recovery, hips and knees are slightly flexed. The feet touch down again and may have gotten slightly wider than they originally started. Trunk is vertical, with the back flat or double arched. The arms are fully straightened overhead. Bar is positioned directly above the athlete's center of gravity, at which time the athlete stands the bar up such that the finished position is with the barbell directly overhead. The athlete has moved his head directly under the bar with his ears, elbows, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles in one vertical plane. During the downward movement phase, the athlete first lowers the bar back to shoulder level, racking it across the anterior deltoids and upper chest. One recommendation for this athlete would be to squat slightly into the motion to receive the force as the bar touches down on the torso. The bar can either then be replaced in a rack or lowered to the floor in 2 phases, very much like the power clean, where the bar is first lowered to thigh level and then placed down on the floor under control. The snatch is an explosive core multi-joint exercise. Prime movers are the hip extensors, including gluteus maximus and hamstrings, knee extensors, including quadriceps, ankle plantar flexors, including soleus and gastrocnemius, shoulder flexors and abductors, including deltoids, shoulder girdle elevators, including upper trapezius, and the elbow extensors, including the triceps brachii. The snatch is similar in many ways to the power clean. It's also executed in a series of phases, including the starting position, first pull, scoop, second pull, and the catch. 2 main differences are the grip width at the starting position and the resulting difference in body position, and the fact that the bar is thrown completely overhead in one movement instead of racked at the shoulders. During the start, because the athlete has a wide grip, usually about 1.5 times shoulder width, the athlete starts out in a lower stance with the hips sitting into a lower squat. However, the back is flat, hips remain below the shoulders. The first pull is executed by the athlete extending the hips and legs with the torso angle remaining constant, back remaining flat or double arched, head remaining in a neutral position with the eyes directly ahead. Weight is supported on a full foot with the weight distributed between the heel and the forefoot. At the top of the first pull, at which point he executes the scoop. Once the scoop is completed, the athlete is in position to perform the second pull or power phase. Again, this is performed by executing an explosive triple extension. The shoulders are shrugged and the elbows begin to flex because of the upward acceleration of the bar. During the catch or recovery, the bar is propelled directly overhead. The athlete receives the bar directly above the head and shoulders with the arms straight. Elbows remain fully extended. Back remains flat or double arched. The knees flex slightly into a 1/4 squat depth position. The weight balance between the heels and the forefoot. The athlete stands the bar up. In the finished position, the bar and the athlete's elbows, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles are in one vertical plane. During the downward phase, The athlete first lowers the bar to the thighs and then sets the bar down under control on the floor. One guideline for this athlete would be to maintain a flat or double arch position while lowering the bar to the floor.
This concludes the free weight and machine exercise techniques presentation.